you'd let an AI sit and chat with your toddler if your toddler's just sitting there nicely and fine. But if your toddler was having it was really emotionally dysregulated, is crying, is all over the place, you wouldn't ask AI to like make sure it's all right. You'd want a human being to come in and hold it and say, you're fine. And it's kind of the same because sometimes you're on psychedelics and you're just this kind of inquisitive toddler who's there, able to chat. But sometimes you are like a complete crying, hysterical, emotionally unregulated mess. And you need that extra support in those moments. And I just don't think AI is going to have, that ability, that human to human connection.
Welcome back to The Intersect. I'm your host, Cory and Grace. Today we're asking what seems on its face a very wild question. Can AI be your trip sitter and support you through a psychedelic journey? As these psychotropic substances become increasingly mainstream and AI is becoming more and more integrated into our lives, what happens when one brings technology into this psychedelic room is sort of a trip, pun intended. So today I'm in conversation with Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, a pedigreed neuroscientist breaking ground at the intersection of women's health, psychedelics, and tech. She saw a glaring void, that women's biology has largely been ignored in psychedelic research. So she founded company Hystelica as a direct response to the lack of female-specific medical research in the psychedelics field. This was fueled by her witnessing that clinical studies rarely accounted for factors like hormonal cycles and overall biology, all which impact the brain's thinking, and which needs to be accounted for in psychedelic treatment of mental health disorders. Grace is working to fix that and is using tech to help. Personally, I'll say Grace makes me feel a little less crazy for asking women where they are in their menstrual cycle, because every day can literally feel different. Hormones shape our experience in ways we've been taught to hide and suppress. So that's where I wanted to start the conversation. Let's get into it. Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, welcome to The Intersect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
It's a pleasure, truly. For listeners that may not know you or your company, you tell us who you are, what you do, how you got into focusing on neuroscience, psychedelics, and the intersection of technology, which we're talking about. Yeah, tell us who you are.
Well, as you say, my name's Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, and I'm a neuroscientist, really studying the brain and specifically looking at the intersections between different psychoactive substances and how they affect the brain. So I started off very much studying cannabis and cannabinoids and how they affect us. And in the last sort of 5-6 years, I've really moved over more into studying psychedelics. And for me, I really decided to focus in on the area of women's biology and psychedelics, and trying to create a company in Hystelica, which I founded, that puts a real spotlight on this area of women's biology and how that is interacting with psychedelics, with the mechanisms of psychedelics and how they work, and how psychedelics themselves could be treating these really specific disorders that so many women suffer from.
Hystelica. You tell me the origin story of the name.
So many people might, recognize the first part of the word. Actually, it's a Greek word, hyster, to mean womb. And obviously, we've seen it being used a lot in words like hysterical and hysteria, which is where we were often, labeling women as being kind of mad without really understanding why, because we never really understood the biology of women and never really understood how female hormones can affect the body. And the word hysteria actually means womb roaming. And that's what we used to think, that the womb was roaming around the body, making women mad. So I decided to reclaim the start of this word, because much of what we are studying is about female hormones and the effect of female hormones. And then the last part of the word, elica, kind of comes from this sort of psychedelica, the study of psychedelics. Bringing these two together to mean Hystelica.
I love it. I reached out to you because I was reading all of these things about ChatGPT or AI being a trip sitter, a quote trip sitter. And I wanted to talk to someone who had obviously expertise within just the trip aspect of it. And like from a medical perspective, you've created a platform where you're specifically studying that around women because our bodies, news break are different than the male body. You're doing a very specific thing, but this hasn't been done really in humanity, the study of such thing, but then specifically within women. So it's just very cool. You're saying that psychedelics are no longer niche. This isn't a niche future therapy. It's here now and it's making a difference. So what is really shifted and this sort of acceptance, this becoming more mainstream, less niche, but then this idea around, women. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you used the word niche there. And obviously, both psychedelic science has been seen as a niche. And very sadly, women's health has been seen as a niche. I always push
Ah,
back hard on that because to define something which affects 51% of the population as a niche is a little bit of a stretch. But when we look at how we have investigated drugs and done drug development and treated people clinically, women's health is treated as a little bit of a niche and a bit of an interest piece that some people have, as opposed to what I believe it should be, which is a mandatory understanding that every drug, we should know how it works in women's bodies and how it can work specifically for women. But in terms of
yes.
psychedelic,
Yes.
I mean, you can't believe we're having to say it out loud still at 2025, but we are. And a lot of the reason that we don't have it is because it's never been done. And the way that science works is, we build on what was known before. We build on the body of knowledge that we had before. And with women, we've just not had, regulatory requirements to do proper investigation in terms of how drugs affect women. We haven't had women who've been in perimenopause and menopause being properly represented in studies. And as a result of that, it's not seen as, is this relevant and significant in terms of drug development? But that's something that at Hystelica we're really, really hoping to change. But we are definitely seeing the psychedelic world moving very fast forward. And, like I say, all science is built on this knowledge of what came before. And in psychedelics, we saw the emergence of psychedelic science way back in the 60s, where there were studies going on and people were starting to realize these substances could be very useful in psychiatric application. But we shut everything down. We made it illegal. We made these substances some of the highest classification for controlled substances that there are. So what we've seen is a complete renaissance within the last 20, 25 years that's really been spearheaded by some rather belligerent and determined individuals who would not let go of the idea that there was good science here. And we've now seen within that time an absolute explosion in terms of a knowledge base of science around these substances doing good. We are seeing improvements in health, but also importantly, not seeing major detriment to health. We're not seeing huge side effects, but we've got a long way to go. There's a big hole, like there is in women's health, that needs to be filled in on the foundational levels of exact mechanisms of how this works.
Are you one of those belligerent people that's been fighting for this, this renaissance that we have?
That's absolutely my role in what I do now at Hystelica, because it took those pioneers back then to get psychedelic science, back on the menu, back allowed and back being researched in universities. But it's now taking a second wave to say, hang on, there are some key parts we need to think about. And women's health is certainly one of those. I'm quite proud to say I am one of those belligerent ones who will not let it go in terms of saying that this is important and we must collect the right data.
What is the percentage of, I would say, men versus women studying these things? What have your male counterparts? Are they like, yeah, glad you're here, let's do this together? Or what's the reaction? Because this is, foundationally, the whole lot of science and medical science is through it's through the rubric of the patriarchy, but also just through the cadaver.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right in what you kind of assumed there. The majority of people who have been working in psychedelic science, the majority of people who've been heading academic teams, clinical teams in biotech have been men. And unfortunately, we're so good at hiding our symptomology and not talking about women's health as females anyway, or not when men are in the room, that's for sure. We're certainly very good at talking about it when it's just all women, which is another thing I wanted to kind of build with Hystelica, inviting women together. You start to hear stories come out that are always so wonderful. But most of it has been that, there's just a misunderstanding of quite the significance of women's biology and just how much it could be affecting outcomes within psychedelic science. And, not just talking about mechanisms of, things like serotonergic systems changing with estrogen, but thinking about things like how your mood changes throughout your hormonal changes and how that could implicate a psychedelic experience. And thankfully now that we actually have really great engagement, we've spoken with a number of clinical teams. We've been sharing questionnaires around hormonal states and things that they should be asking women in their trials. There's a lot more females coming into the field, a lot of female PhD students working in psychedelic science now, and those are the ones who are now going to their PIs and saying, hey, we need to put this in our work. We need to make sure this is done. The other side you sometimes get, which is, well, it's actually really difficult. It's actually really difficult to evaluate women. And they're not wrong. It is difficult, but just because something is difficult does not mean it should not be done. We have seen, particularly in the past, drug development being really restricted to only male participants because then you don't get these fluctuations in hormones, and clinical trials are very expensive. You only have a small handful of participants. The variability between women is a lot when you're looking at different hormonal states, right?
I mean, I'm a different person every day within a 30-day
Hmm.
period. I have anxiety around scheduling things when I'm thinking about
Hmm.
where I'm going to be, like my mental, physical, because it changes. Is the idea that it's hard to have data around clinical trials with women because of the fluctuation of hormones? Is that what we're saying?
Absolutely, because there's, differences
Mhm.
between women, even within ourselves, there's differences. And, how do you quantify that and how do you use it in a meaningful way? Well, the answer to that is when we do clinical trials, we have got the advent of incredible tech. We've got the advent of incredible tech in the femtech space that now allows us to track menstrual cycles. We have new tech that can take saliva samples. So if someone's in perimenopause, we can still see what their hormone levels are on any given day. And with that, and the ability of us to take large, difficult data sets and find meaning in them using tools like AI and, other such mathematical tools, we should be able to now account for women's hormonal landscape at the time of taking psychedelics and, at the time of giving their questionnaire results and the time of doing integration talks and all of these things that we then can interpret in our result. It is kind of easy to forget that you're naturally cycling along in the background and feeling very different. And so we can start to think about how different tech can A, be used in clinical trials and research and collecting the data, but B, we can use it ourselves so we can make informed choices or just inform ourselves like, you know what, I do feel a bit rubbish today. I do feel a bit annoyed, or I am planning to do a big psychedelic retreat and I realize I'm going to be bleeding on that day. And we can make those decisions for ourselves because we have these incredible tools now.
I love this. I mean, because we do have these tools, and they can help us. There's just been such taboo about talking about these things, and also that it was just a monolithic experience. It's like you have your period or you don't, and that's not the reality of our daily fluctuations. But it sounds like you're advising some of these kind of specific new toolings and AI, et cetera, that can help women empower women in their own medical journey. So I just like love any anecdotes of that, or how you're using that, or how just in general. This is very refreshing to hear. Yeah. Tell us how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, first and foremost, if you are a menstruating woman, I think it's really important to track your menstrual cycle, just A, because then you kind of know what's coming, no nasty surprises on the day you decided to wear white jeans, right? But also, it goes so much beyond that. As I say, you can now get these incredible apps that will have used tools like AI and systematic reviews of the literature to try and understand how each phase of the menstrual cycle is affecting our brain. When we think about hormones like estrogen and progesterone, They're very powerful neurosteroids. We're taught about what they do to our ovaries and how they make us, fertile or not fertile at different times of the month. But what we're not really taught about is how they affect different parts of our brains. Now, in the context of psychedelic science, whenever we engage with psychedelics, particularly if we're using large doses of psychedelics, so we're talking about hallucinogenic doses, so those that are kind of high enough to really change your perception and take you into a journey, as many people might describe it. And within that, you need to think about what is your mindset going in. And if you are female, I think it's important to really track yourself, ask yourself the questions about how it is changing within your cycle. But it's actually very difficult to remember how you felt last week, especially now your hormones have all changed. So using this tech to just every day, every other day, make a quick note and using this as a real way to kind of predict when is going to be the best time for you. But also, you can start to then see where symptoms are getting a lot. And you can start to track your symptoms. So when you do go to see your physician, you're not just a woman coming in and bitching and moaning, probably when you're feeling at your worst, right? Because that's normally when you decide, that's it, I'm going to go and see somebody about this. You can
Yeah.
go in there with prepared data from that you have collected yourself from yourself and say, hey, look, this isn't right. My period pain is enough that I am bedbound for 1 day a month. That is not acceptable. Having good records of your menstrual cycle will be extremely useful because the transition between menstruating and going into menopause can be up to 10 years. And many women do not know that it's happening.
This part was not taught in any context. There's just been
Exactly. It's
no
never
education.
told.
Yeah.
Having that data, that you can go to your physicians and advocate for yourself with, I think is incredible.
Thank you for that. But, it just strikes me, you could take this data, you collect this data, and then you're like dumping it into your AI companion of choice,
Mhm.
and it's going to do a lot of work for you. We have not, we've been alone in this journey, I guess is what I'm saying. When you're in the doctor, you're explaining to somebody who's maybe never treated you before, we have to bring our own history with us in some way. But there's this piece of empowerment, this tech that could actually help us with that we've never had before. I mean, what is your thought on using your AI companion, just call it Chat GPT, when you're trying to understand what's happening with you?
You could even, as I say, just keep a simple spreadsheet where you're just entering in 28 days or however long your cycle is per sheet, and you're just jotting down notable symptoms that you have on every day
Hmm.
for a couple of cycles. And then you're right, ask AI to say, can you summarize what the fluctuations of cycles are through the different phases of my menstrual cycle and give me a kind of breakdown so that for next month I've almost got like a full warning. So you give me a breakdown for each day, what kind of moods and energy changes I should or could be expecting. But again, as with anything with AI, and I think it's something we'll come on to talk about more with the trip sitting, it's a tool to help us in sort of understanding. It's not a second opinion. It's not a doctor in that regard. But it can certainly, as you say, condense and understand the totality of the scientific literature that currently exists around women and women's health in a way that sadly the majority of physicians have just not been trained to do.
Yeah. I feel less crazy, honestly. Every sentence you say, I'm like, yeah, that's okay. Let's pull up here. Psychedelics aren't niche anymore. However, women's biology still gets treated like it is. This is culture dragging its feet, as the science it gets studied is a byproduct of the culture we operate in. And what Grace is laying out is bigger than just hormones and cycles. I see it as this rewriting of who gets to be included in the research, the treatment, the overall story. So, tech is one of the tools helping close this gap to get closer to the truth about our own biology. It may be what finally pushes culture to catch up. Let's keep going. So, getting to trip sitting, well, first off, without no AI involved, if someone's coming to you, they're, I've done all this, therapy, I've unpacked, I want to go on this like quote journey.
Mhm.
Um, what does that look like with with a professional experience sort of beginning to end. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they vary obviously hugely because they're such individual experiences and they're such individually provided experiences depended on the facilitator of it. If you're going into the Amazon jungle to sit with, Shipibo tribesmen, you're obviously going to prepare very much for that experience about, going into the jungle. But, the actual experience itself, there's not a huge amount of interaction between you and the facilitators. You're kind of very alone in the experience. But yeah, there are other experiences, particularly like if you think about MDMA, not a classic psychedelic, but one that's very close to being licensed for as a legal medicine in the US. With that, it's much more of a talkative therapeutic experience where you would be sitting and having a conversation with usually a clinical psychologist if you were doing it in a clinical setting. But in the sort of middle between these, more extremes, psychedelics are done in group settings. So it's more than one of you who's going to be taking the substance. You will meet with the facilitators, and there'll be a kind of a lead on that, and then other facilitators who are helping, who will explain to you what the whole process is and how you're going to consume the medicine, the amount of time you can expect for it to kick in, what are the kind of feelings you might have. These are some breathing techniques you can use to kind of calm yourself down. And then you will start to have the experience, and they will be there. And a lot of what they do in that ceremony space is actually quite physical in that they're physically coming over to you and checking that you're all right. And, if you need more tissues or water or someone just to hold your hand for a minute, they will come and do that. When we see more spiritual practitioners working, often they have a lot of different spiritual tools they will use, often burning a lot of smoke, using kind of feathers to move air and things that can be a big part of how they give that experience. And then afterwards, they will be there in these sort of ways where they will talk you through what happened, help you to unpick some of the experiences and, the visions and the feelings and the realizations that you had. And that will form part of your integration. And maybe you speak to that person once after the ceremony, maybe you keep speaking to them for a whole year. It really depends on that on whatever experience it is. But when it's done in the kind of person sense, somebody is there physically with you. A lot of it is sort of a little bit like that. It's sort of a cross between helping somebody give birth and watching over a sleeping toddler. It's kind of, sometimes it's all kind of chaos, and you're helping somebody through a process, and other times you're just sitting there quietly waiting for them to move through.
I loved that analogy you just gave. It's like there could be an emergency, and I don't know, maybe like half of what you just laid out could be done by an AI
Mhm.
companion in some way in terms of like the information. They'll help you through your sort of getting yourself into that state to be ready, all the things. I think I'm getting the sense on that experience and how important a person is. I hold your hand. So these experiences that have been reported by people that say, "Yeah, I've done this. I've had AI as a trip sitter in some kind of therapeutic or just recreational, I don't know, way." I mean, what's your view on that?
Wow, I think it's a very interesting area, and I've certainly had an awful lot of conversations around it. And I think on the first half, I think it's great because one of the biggest problems that we have with psychedelic science is, well, with psychedelic medicines, is that they're not very accessible. But if we look at like the state of Colorado, for instance, you can go to the local shop and buy yourself however many grams of psilocybin mushrooms and go home and take them perfectly legally. So getting hold of these substances is not so crazy anymore. So once you get past that, then you've got to think about, well, the cost of going to a retreat or paying somebody to come and going through all the preparation and the therapy runs very quickly into the thousands of dollars. And often,
Mm.
we're talking about treating people who've got mental health disorders, who maybe do not have that kind of money that they can spend, but you want to access this, and you want some help. And so I think it can be really very useful to try and reduce those costs. So when we think about what is, good preparation for psychedelic science, first of all, it's just the kind of finding out, what is the experience like? How should I prepare? What are some breathing practices I can use? All of that stuff is very, very doable on AI. When we think about intention setting for a ceremony, a lot of
Hmm.
us who've never really opened up to anyone or never really, and that's one of the things with psychedelic science or with psychedelic medicines, there's no escaping what is your real trauma. What is the real thing that is giving you the
Mm.
rub? And sometimes when we sit down with therapists and we sit down with other human beings, our ego is with us, right? And our ego it feels shame and it feels embarrassment. And so being genuinely honest about those experiences can be difficult. Whereas with an AI, we can talk about our intentions. We can perhaps talk about our things that we wouldn't be comfortable talking with another human being about, and be able to access that very cheaply in that process. And so I think in that preparation, and then again on the backside, on the integration where we want to come out, talk about what happened, it can be wonderful. Now, we'll caveat all of that with the idea that AI has been built to please us. It is built to be our friend. It is built to give us the answer we have asked for.
Ah,
Now,
okay,
when
yeah.
you go
And
to a
I see where you're
therapist,
going. Yeah.
when you go to a therapist, sometimes they tell you things that aren't so comfortable to hear. Sometimes they propose things which are not so, yeah, perhaps not what we not the outcome that we want from it. And so we must always be mindful when we're speaking with an AI that it's very likely to just be supporting a lot of our kind of beliefs in that way, and perhaps not helping us to interrogate some of those darker parts. But what you're really asking me is, can it sit with you while you're actually under the influence? Now, we have incredible chat functions on these AIs, right? I use it all the time when I'm in the park walking my dog, walking around chatting to AI. And that's incredible. And it certainly could be used with somebody during a psychedelic experience. Now, I would say to you, safety is everything. Safety must be first and foremost. If you're a very experienced psychedelic user, if this is something you've done before, if solo tripping on your own is something that you feel comfortable doing and you're willing to take that risk, then yes, maybe you could use AI in that way. And like I say, you probably want to set up the chat function, because when you take these substances, it alters your perception such that a screen typing and
Mm.
and reading a screen would not be the same as when you were sober, put it that way,
So you're
and
saying
it might
audio
be
chat
difficult.
as in like voice, like you're having a
Yeah. Yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
wanna be
yeah.
chatting to it and it's chatting back to you, because typing and stuff is not so easy. And you probably wanna think about, doing doses that are suitable for that. So not super
Mm,
high hero doses where you are, having full ego death. And because during those times it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to kind of
mm,
maintain kind of focus and control enough to be able to communicate with the AI. And what you don't want is to get to a point where you're super high. The AI is now, I don't know, it's dropped off, or it's not talking to you, or it's saying the wrong things, and you've not got a backup plan of a playlist you can put on or whatever. And you could end up going into a bad trip. But if you're not experienced with psychedelics or anything, then, I would not recommend doing doses alone for your first time. I think within that's where, AI is wonderful and it's going to take over lots of people's jobs. But if we think about the jobs it won't be taking over, it's the nurses, it's the people who are going to be there and have to physically hold you and support you through these times. And psychedelics is no different. There is a huge requirement for human to human connection within psychedelic experiences that I don't think we can overcome using just AI. I think it can support, as I say, better preparation, better integration, cheaper ways of delivering much more comprehensive programs. It certainly could help us in the experience in more lower doses when we can speak to it and communicate. But in terms of feeling safe and feeling secure And feeling safe is one of the fundamental things about doing psychedelics. You must feel safe at the time of taking them. That's where other human beings just cannot be beaten, right?
It could be this could be something that works for some people, right? But it's
Mm.
the again, it's like back to our like sort of first part of the conversation, which is like, what state are you in yourself? Are
Mhm.
you a person that is sort of meets the criteria for trying to do this like solo trip via an AI companion, and you've got everything set up the right way, et cetera? So, you know, my sort of quick takeaway in just this live moment is that there's a pathway for this to be useful, but we're in the early stages and early days. And so it, I like just the thing that you said about like the holding the hand. I mean,
Yeah.
that matters in those moments.
And I think
Yeah.
it can really be used, as well. We're coming to a point where we could video lots of people going through ceremonies and feed that into AI and get it to understand. Can you notice when one of these people becomes agitated and alert us? We could use it in those sorts of ways, but slightly drawing back um, to the metaphor I used earlier, yeah, I had a really great conversation with one of my colleagues who has a toddler, and she also is a clinical psychologist who sits with people through psychedelic retreats, and she drew this beautiful comparison between the two, and it's sort of like you'd let an AI sit and chat with your toddler if your toddler's just sitting there nicely and fine, but if your toddler was having it was really emotionally dysregulated, is crying, is all over the place. You wouldn't ask AI to like make sure it's all right. Well, you'd want a human being to come in and hold it and say, you're fine, and to sit there and help it through that very difficult process. And it's kind of the same because sometimes you're on psychedelics and you're just this kind of inquisitive toddler who's there, able to chat. But sometimes you are like a complete crying, hysterical, emotionally
Yeah.
unregulated mess. And you need that extra support in those moments in order to help you through it and through to the other side. And I just don't think AI is going to have that ability, that human to human connection. Because also one of the things that is really interesting when we take psychedelics is we become so much more aware of the energies that transfer between human beings.
Thank you for all of this. Lastly, you touched on how you walking around the dog park chatting with your AI. How are you using AI?
I mean, I try and integrate it as much as I can, just because of how wonderful it is. At kind of speeding up our processes. What I do an awful lot is, using it to synthesize large research documents and things, or even just things I'm interested. I was like, can you just give me a quick summary of what this is or whatever? Um, Often I will use it to help me design different surveys that I want to do. I will
Mm.
ask it to kind of come up with, I'll say, I want to find out this. Design me a question that I can ask this. Um, and yeah, generally just for, I'm terribly dyslexic, so I use it mostly to correct my grammar and spelling. It's
What a
what I
great
mostly.
that's I mean, that's so excellent. What a great it just sounds like it's a little bit of your like lab companion.
Yeah.
It's your little yeah.
But for me, the most wonderful thing of it is, but it's also slightly bittersweet. I look back to my PhD years. I look back at the months and months in the hot summer of London I spent trying to work out code to do data analysis. And the idea now that I can just go and say, why is my Python script not running? And it
Yep.
will tell
Yeah.
me. Now, we don't now all need to be data scientists. As long as you've got a clear understanding of what your questions are and what your data is, then you can get there in an absolute fraction of the time and effort that it used to take.
Okay, this was awesome. Thank you. That was Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, reminding us why women's biology cannot be a side note in psychedelic science. Use AI to prepare, integrate, maybe even talk through the edges. But when it comes to the middle of the experience, sometimes what you need is not an algorithm, but a human hand. Personally, I'm considering a guided experience myself, but I know I still have work to do before I'm ready. And when I get there, I'll probably want a human. Still, I'm open to what tech can do in the preparation. And I'll always remember Grace's metaphor. You'd let AI chat with your toddler if the toddler was sitting nicely. But if that toddler was crying and dysregulated, you'd want a human to hold them and say you're fine. Psychedelics can be like that, sometimes curious and light, sometimes unpredictable and overwhelming. And your own mind can be the same. That's why trust and safety in the companionship you choose matters. But maybe we're not far off from AI being part of the equation. We'll check back in with Grace in the future. Now, let's wrap up with a few AI news bits. First up, he sold his digital likeness. Now his avatar is shilling supplements on TikTok. Scott Jacquemin, a 52-year-old actor in Dallas, licensed his likeness to TikTok and now sees a digital twin pitching everything from horoscopes to puzzle apps in his voice, even in Spanish, something he has never learned. TikTok introduced AI avatars last year to front video ads that appear seamless in the TikTok feed. Mr. Jacquemin's likeness is one of more than a dozen that TikTok advertisers can select to promote their products. This really is a new world of AI and monetizing oneself. Next up, the Business of Fashion reports that vibe marketing has officially hit the beauty sector. Brands from Estee Lauder to indie labels are embracing Gen AI to churn out product images, campaign storyboards, and even fragrance formulas based on prompted vibes. MAC Cosmetics, for instance, now uses Adobe Firefly to instantly spin out multiple versions of its campaigns, while Prada Beauty has used AI to generate a synthetic jasmine accord note for its perfumes. Critics say these so-called efficiency gains can risk producing bland slop, erasing cultural nuance. So while vibe marketing may save brands time and money, the risk is a beauty industry full of generic slop. Let's see where this goes and if consumers take to it. Lastly, AI's new obsession: cat soap operas. AI-generated cat soap operas are exploding across TikTok and Instagram, where millions of people are binge-watching surreal 30-second stories of jacked, human-bodied cats caught in melodramas of cheating, revenge, and tragedy. The clips are produced with Gen AI tools by anonymous creators chasing virality, packaging fast-moving plots into addictive bites, soundtracked by the likes of Billie Eilish's What Was I Made For? The result is a strange new economy where cats with six-packs star in cautionary tales about betrayal, violence, and redemption, and audiences cannot look away. Okay, that's it for this week's show. If you liked what you heard, please give us a follow on whatever platform you're listening. And if you have any ideas or thoughts for the show, as always, feel free to shoot us an email. ideas@theintersectshow.com. That's IDEAS@theintersectshow.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.